glad you had a good learning experience and your trip to China. I want to hear something about that, I hope.
Great.
And I'm happy to welcome you to Manhattan Neighborhood Network Public Access Facilities in New York.
Fascinating, Harold.
Yeah, I believe in it. And welcome very much to our conversation. It's a pleasure to welcome to the program John Milligan-Whyte. And John Milligan-Whyte is an attorney. He has a law firm. We're going to get into that based, I guess, in Bermuda. He's got a very interesting story to tell. He's very active on the world scene. He has a great sense of social conscience about how we can best serve the needs of this planet Earth. And he is, I see you have on the credits, a painter of philosophy,
Yeah.
which is very interesting because you do these examples of that. But anyway, welcome very much, John, to
Thank you, Harold.
John to the program, and welcome to conversation. I wonder if you could share your own background, if you would, for us, please, where you were born and raised, and then we could get into a discussion about the state of the world and some of the things that you think are worth really focusing on and some of your activities.
Very well. I was born in 1952 in California, and I grew up in Los Angeles and a small town in Ontario, Cornwall, Ontario, and I would go back and forth between the two. And then when I went to university, I said hello to a girl, and she was from Bermuda, and so I ended up living in Bermuda since 1984.
It was the girl what brought you to Bermuda.
The girl brought me to Bermuda.
Well, I can understand. Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. That's right. You said early on you had a tie with Ontario, did you?
Yeah, I would spend sort of winters in Ontario and the summers in the United States and California.
Is that wise?
No,
I mean, you would think people go to Florida in the or the South in the winter, and the other way. You're a contrarian?
well, no, I sort of was brought up between two families, and so I go back and forth between them. And the Milligans lived in Ontario, and the Whites lived in California.
Oh, I see. Okay. What part of Ontario? Because I was from Detroit. Windsor was just across the river, and we had a feeling for Ontario.
We had a feeling for the States because it was also across the river, and you had a more liberal approach to youthful drinking.
Yes, I know. We used to have to get to New York. You could drink at 18, get a glass of beer at 18 legally, right? That sort of thing. And then you went to law school in Canada.
That's right.
And then you met your wife-to-be, and you started a law firm in Bermuda.
That's
I don't know,
right.
something you want to fill in there, or is that, maybe that's the place where we could jump off onto the
Sure. Well,
immediate past into the present.
I was always very interested in the nature of people and the nature of social progress and the nature of what a good society was, and so I studied that sort of thing and philosophy and political philosophy. And before I went to law school, I was helping to teach a course in Canadian politics, and I had seen this girl around the university, and I'd made a note to talk to her, and I did. And I asked her what she thought of whether she went to school or worked at the university. And she was a black Bermudian lady with a huge afro. This is about 1976.
They were very in then.
Very big.
Yeah.
She wouldn't have been able to fit in the
That was
studio.
Bob Marley time, too.
That's
I think,
right.
with the reggae, yeah.
So she said she thought the kids that went to this particular school were kind of boring because they were all the same, and that a university should be more universal. I was very impressed with that, so I married her, and we went to law school together.
You did, yeah, right.
And then I went to some more law school and worked for a law firm, and got the foolish idea in my head that I'd start a law firm right out of being called to the bar, which I did.
You were called to the bar in Bermuda?
In Ontario in 1984, and then in Bermuda in 1985.
I see, right, okay, right.
And
what about in the United States?
no,
No?
no, just
It was just sort of leapfrog the
Yeah.
United States. I see.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, that's right. And so you set up a law firm
In Bermuda.
and you were specializing in, or were general law, or you got specializing in?
Well, in the summer of first year law school, I'd become fascinated with Bermuda
Mm-hmm.
before we went to law school,
Right.
because it had a property vote until 1968.
Really?
Yeah. So Bermuda was like one of, like, very a sister to the American 13 colonies that formed the United
Yeah,
States
you told
initially.
me that. That's really interesting. Yeah.
And as through 13 generations in those American states, the franchise, the ability to vote, got expanded and expanded as each new wave of immigrants came.
Right.
So you had a gradual transformation.
Yeah.
In Bermuda, that one adult, one vote, there was a legislature from 1620 to 1968,
Oh.
but in 1967, if you owned property, you could have up to 37 votes in an election, and if you didn't, you had no vote at all.
Incredible in the modern era.
And they
Yeah.
changed overnight.
Wow, that's a big paradigm shift.
It's a
isn't it?
big paradigm
Yeah.
shift, and it's such a small place. It was
Yeah.
like a sort of a backless watch,
Yeah.
where you had a little mini country, and you could see things that are not as clear in a country the size of the United States.
Yeah.
So I became very interested in Bermuda, and therefore asked, when I went to law school, what areas of law were needed in Bermuda which nobody knew anything about. And
Thinking ahead. Yeah.
well, I wanted to be useful.
Yeah,
Harold.
sure. I understand. Yeah.
And people said international tax and finance, and they also said reinsurance law. So I went off and learned a lot about reinsurance law, and reinsurance had been so profitable that they never had to use lawyers.
Oh, really?
So it suddenly became unprofitable just as I was entering practice.
Like that fellow in Little Abner. Do you remember the one who used to have the cloud following him
That's
around?
right.
Was it Little Abner or was
No.
it? No.
It's Linus. It's Peanuts.
Oh, no. Oh, no. Well, there was one in Little
Yeah.
Abner. I think
Yeah,
the guy
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, he followed a cloud. Everywhere is sunny except there's a cloud.
That's
Yeah,
right.
well,
I
mean,
remember.
that's it. Yeah. Anyway, you did that, and so you reinsure. What is maybe you could tell us what reinsurance law is about, or reinsuring processes in our society are about.
Well, the way I like to let's suppose there's a neighborhood in New York or California, Los Angeles, which has 100 houses. And let's suppose statistically 4 burn down a year. And there are 3,000 companies in the United States that sell fire insurance. Let's say Allstate does a very good job and it gets all 100 houses. Well, if an airplane goes down that neighborhood, it's not just 4 houses.
Yeah.
So Allstate, for example, reinsures the risk with other companies. The analogy would be they're the insurance company is like the retail operation.
Right.
And the reinsurance company is like the wholesaler that doesn't deal with the original insured,
Right.
but provides lots of capital capacity. In this instance, America reinsures risk in Bermuda, England, Germany, and Switzerland.
Wait, these are private companies doing this,
Yeah.
or is there a role for government in that, or not, or like to have the full faith and credit of a sovereign country be behind an industry that, let's just say, a casualty insurance industry against business loss on reasonably good stock offerings and so forth? Or is that a possibility, or has it ever happened, or can it happen, or could it happen?
The precedent that comes to mind immediately is there's a federal government body which provides flood insurance
Okay.
in the Midwest of the United States for some reason around the Mississippi.
Oh, yes.
I don't know why. And in that case, people insisted on living in the floodplain, and it wasn't profitable for a private company to do that, and so government said, fine, we will provide that sort of coverage. The other example that could be pointed to is after September 11th, the insured loss on the 2 towers was somewhere between $110 billion. And I'm proud to say that Bermuda companies paid a lot of it. government,
And did you represent those companies? Or
some of them,
Some of
yeah,
them.
and they just wrote checks right away. In
Yeah.
fact,
All right.
two of the companies had actually looked at the possibility of planes going into both towers and worked out in advance what their loss exposure would be. And it was about 500 million for one and 600 million for the other.
They paid it?
And they paid it.
Wow. Just right like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But
Yeah.
since the insurance industry in America didn't have enough capital to begin to cope with the risk that these terrorist incidents caused, the federal government, wanting such coverage to be available, is beginning to be an insurer of last resort.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's
It's like a reinsuring, is it, of the industry's ability to do, the private sector's ability to do that, or?
well, my understanding is it's a work in progress.
Yeah. I mean, it could be a precedent that's important in a large tablet. Yeah.
That's right.
Oh.
It's a work in progress because you cannot operate business without insurance,
Okay.
because sooner or later you're going, no matter how big a company you are, even a Microsoft or General Motors, sooner or later you're going to have some event which is going to wipe you out. And so insurance is essential to distribute that sort of risk. And I think the terrorism example is a good one where, in the national interest, government is beginning to explore how they will support. They don't want to bankrupt the insurance industry.
Right.
And on the other hand, they don't want no coverage available for terrorist events. So government and the insurance and reinsurance industry, as we speak, are trying to, as a work in progress, figure out what sort of coverage should be available and how it can be financed. And there is a big role being played by the federal government.
That's and you're in touch with that, having studied reinsurance law and so forth. They just had, we talked to you once in the past, and but they're investigating, Elliot Spitzer's investigating Mr. Greenberg now.
Yeah.
AG, what is it, AGA?
AIG.
AIG and so forth. It's on those, and then they were also talking to Mr. Hathaway himself, I think.
Oh, you mean Mr. Buffett?
Yeah.
Yeah, Warren Buffett.
I don't know, but it was the reinsurance. They were investigating the reinsurance practices or something. Can you shed any light on that, or the significance of it for the? Because you've studied it, so you understand it. What's that about? That's reinsurance in the private sector thing.
Well, my take on that, Harold, is that there was a whole bunch of corporate conduct which was normal and thought not to be harmful. But in about 3 or 4 years ago, WorldCom, Enron, and several other companies began doing things which made the believability of balance sheets not only questionable, but in those two examples, they produced some of the largest insolvencies in the history of the United States.
Yeah, a real,
And that caused the regulatory pendulum, which had been very laissez-faire, in which a company like American International Group with $700 billion in market value.
700 billion with a B?
Yeah, with a B.
Holy Toledo, yeah.
Was viewed as absolutely a leader. Suddenly, and it happens off periodically, when you have some corporations doing something that is so threatening, as in the WorldCom example and the Enron example, to the believability of people.
Of the whole system.
Of the whole system.
Yeah, right.
Of the legitimacy of the whole assumption that public accounting firms can audit and corporations can present true and fair sort of financial statements.
Right. Arthur Anderson went under, didn't he?
It did.
Yeah.
It's a pretty big penalty.
Yeah, yeah.
In that climate, the goalposts have moved completely, and my personal view is that that is part of the normal, healthy process. In other words, something that you may have been doing yesterday, which we didn't know was harmful, turns out to be harmful, and there's kind of an overreaction in going the other way,
Right.
but it's an essential overreaction because you have to preserve people's confidence
In the system.
in the honesty of the system.
Yeah, because if that goes, you're in really deep doo-doo.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
To take that to
There's danger of that, do you think?
I thought there was, but
Seems to be keep going. You
the
know,
SEC
onward through the fog,
SEC
Crum
passed
used to say, yeah.
passed a rule saying that about a year or a little over a year ago, the chairman and CEOs and others, senior management, had to sign the financial statements, saying, in other words, the SEC said, if you've been manipulating your financial statements, come clean now, because we'll forgive you for that sort of stuff,
Amnesty,
probably. They didn't put it that way, but come clean now.
Yeah, right,
because
right.
once we go past this date, you're going to sign those things personally, and your heads are going to roll personally if you've fudged the numbers.
Was that under Harvey Pitt in that? Or?
I don't know the answer to that.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
But I think that
There's been a change.
there's been a change. That's a healthy process.
Yeah.
And
Is it self-correcting okay, do you think? Do you have faith in it, and it's going to
Well, I
self-correct?
thought there would be...
Mr. Spitzer's out there fighting what a lot of people see as a lonely battle. I don't know what Mr. Lay, is he still playing golf and enjoying things?
I think Mr. Lay is I don't know the latest, but I think he's got problems coming. But I think that Mr. Spitzer is basically
running for governor.
Well, yeah, but he's doing something useful.
Okay.
He's basically asking fundamental questions about the integrity of business practices. And as soon as those questions are asked, the business practices aren't defensible, and big changes occur. Now, in 10 years, they'll have drifted back to where they were.
The ebb and the flow of things.
But it's a positive sort of thing. Now, I think in your specific question about Jack Welch at General Electric was famous last time I had looked, producing something like 50 quarters of sustained incremental development.
Not bad.
And the compensation of executives paid them the most if there was sustained incremental profits. So if you had a lot of profits in one year, you'd use accounting methods, quite legitimate accounting methods, to put those aside so that if you had losses in a later year, you could smooth the results.
I see,
And I think that's what Mr. Greenberg was doing. My understanding is that Mr. Buffett's people were extremely transparent when people asked questions about the transaction. And in fact, I read that they helped the regulators understand the transactions. In other words, they just were very upfront. This is what the transaction was. This is the purpose. Ask me anything, and I'll tell you. I'm speculating on what I read.
I think Mr. Spitzer wanted some information from Mr. Buffett to get at Mr. Greenberg, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure.
But I think AIG was a little bit more not as responsive. And personally, I found when I make a mistake,
Better own up?
smart move is to own up.
Yes.
And get it all over with one time.
Yeah, it's a
and
good...
people will tend to forgive you if it's forgivable at all.
Yeah, right, if you can. Yeah, it's like, that's something, you know. Now, I don't want to go, but this is really an important issue, I think, beyond what most people would understand, but you have this reinsurance thing. The big companies that are involved in it, we used to have Lloyd's of London, was that one? And are there European-based, and to what degree does this reinsurance industry exist, and what is its role and its significant potential role as we begin to look ahead in terms of the world business economy?
In the United States, there are about 3,000 companies that provide property casualty insurance.
Okay.
And they have about $368 billion in resources and assets. The biggest of them was General Re, which when Mr. Buffett's company, Hathaway, purchased it, was worth about $6 billion.
Wow. Yeah.
On the other hand, because the Europeans, particularly the Germans and the Swiss, don't have the insider trading law and the antitrust laws that
Okay.
America has,
Okay.
they're able to have a situation where the largest bank in Germany, Deutsche Bank, owns 25% of the biggest engineering firm, Siemens, and it owns 25%, and so they all own a piece of each
Yeah,
other,
right,
sort of
okay.
like the European royal families.
I see. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So Munich Re, which was part of that little necklace of companies, was worth about 80 billion, and the largest American company was worth about 6. Now, Lloyd's of London essentially grew out of the British Empire, and a lot of guys, when they got out of the army, became brokers or underwriters at Lloyd's of London because they understood what was going on in all these far-off places.
Yes.
Where
Right. This globalization to come. Yeah.
money was funneled in from all over the world, and it was generally very profitable, and you didn't really have to put up very much cash. However, it was self-regulating, and sometimes, as you pointed out to
Off
me,
time goes awry.
yeah, if you're self-regulating, you can perhaps
You can overlook a multitude of sins. Yeah.
And
yeah.
so Lloyd's of London has gone from 106 syndicates to 52.
Really.
And 2 Bermuda companies that were formed in 1985 bought 25% of Lloyd's of London a few years ago.
Really? Oh, God. Yeah. So these are all developments that you've been involved with, and your law firm there and everything. Now, you've also taken, if I'm not mistaken, you've taken interest in a venture capital way in the country of China, and you've been spending time there. You just were recently there and so forth. Maybe you could address some of that. You have Core Capital as a company that you're chair of.
Core Capital is...
and your law firm is Milligan-Whyte Smith?
Milligan-Whyte Smith.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Myself and a Chinese professor are writing a book about the relationship about China and foreign corporations. What we say in the book really is foreign corporations should understand what's occurring in China, and they should align their China strategies with China's strategy.
Absolutely. Hardly a more important question as we look. There's so much activity going and directed at China, and so much of China coming to America.
Emphatically, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
China began trading with America 25 years ago, and today, using 30% of the Chinese economy, 31% of all consumer goods bought in the United States are bought from China.
And growing.
And growing.
And big ticket things. They got Boeings they're producing over there. Yeah, okay, yeah.
And the Chinese are 22% of the human race. For over 50 years, they essentially ignored the rest of the world.
Inner empire thinking.
I personally cannot see any way. They're a very interesting experiment. They're not a democratic country.
Right, right.
We have not seen before, as far as I'm aware, countries produce the type of productivity that, for example, the United States produced without being democratic.
You mean over the longer haul?
Over the longer haul.
Yeah.
And when I was growing up, I made the assumption that our productivity was related to our democratic institutions.
We'd like to think that, yeah.
Well, the problem is that China's not a democracy, and their productivity is
We're
incredible.
Beetle-bomb by compared.
We really are not going to be able to compete with China. And we essentially, it has been said that the 19th century belonged to England, and the 20th century belonged to America, and the 21st century belongs to Chinese. The Chinese are going to start buying major American corporations at a rate that is going to just shock people.
Really?
For example.
And also some European, maybe?
Yeah, they could buy German companies for the technology, and the cost of producing the goods in Germany, the labor component is 70% of the cost of goods, and it's 17% in China.
Big differential.
Big differential.
Is that based upon wage-slave conditions, or what do you think? And is it growing, and is there a labor union movement? What's bringing it up? Is the market going to bring sufficient income to the folks, or are they going to be based upon, these questions? What do you think? You've had experience with it.
My feeling is that if you took an American, a New Yorker from 1776, and you put them beside a Chinese fellow, comparable fellow from 2005, they would have a lot in common.
Really?
They would be very hard scrabble, lean and hungry. They'd probably both be about 5 feet tall because they'd be undernourished, and they could compete effectively with each other. But if you took a modern New Yorker and put him beside a Chinese guy, the Chinese guy would
eat him up.
Eat him up.
We're too soft.
And
right?
in Vietnam, basically,
Uh-huh.
I remember reading that an American soldier, after 3 or 4 days without eating, couldn't fight, and the Chinese soldiers could fight after 26 days of not eating. So the problem is that we are at a later stage in our economic development than China is, and there's they're 22% of the human race.
Yeah, right.
And what concerns me is that we must recognize that we can't beat them, so we have to join them. We have to help. My recommendation is that American corporations should enter into genuine joint ventures with Chinese companies, recognizing that the global joint venture, the Chinese company is going to dwarf the American company, but the American company may survive where its competitors, foreign competitors who don't have an effective China strategy, will go out of business.
What's your take on the Western, or let's say European American business community's quote-unquote take on China? Are people getting it? Is there a lesson to be learned, and what are some of them, and those kind of things in a pattern way?
I think that they're not getting it. There was about $350 or $400 billion of foreign investment in China between 1979 and 2003. That huge amount of foreign investment made China's economy grow at about a 9.5% rate per year. America might grow at a 2 or 3% rate per year.
Yeah.
Now,
it's a bigger base they're building from, and that, yeah.
And now, the first 25 years have been completed, and in my view, the Chinese are about now ready to deploy the second part of it, in which they will buy. In 15 years' time, the Fortune 100 will be Chinese.
Really?
And I'll give you an interesting...
In how long?
10, 15 years, if
really?
not faster.
Moving that fast?
I think you'll see... major... Well, a company called Legend purchased IBM's personal computer business.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. They did. Yeah, I know. And they
so the American company was no longer viable, and the Chinese company bought it.
They seem to be making everything in the world in China.
I spoke at a venture capital conference about 3 weeks ago.
Yes, I know.
In
You
China.
just went to that. Yeah.
And the theme was Chinese government wants to move from being the factory floor of the world to being the innovative economy of the world.
Yes, all right. All right.
Normally, it's thought that they copy things, but their ability to invent things is grossly underestimated from what I've seen.
Well educated, or a segment of the population is very well educated. Maybe we could address that a little.
They're very intelligent, pragmatic people. I go back to America in 1776, produced an incredible generation of leaders.
Yes, it did.
They built the most interesting thing I know of in history, called the U.S. Constitution.
Yeah.
And it's lasted. I'm concerned basically that as a proud democracy like America finds that it cannot compete and becomes economically second-rate power, that it may move, instead of China becoming a democracy, America may become fascism.
Yeah, it's a danger. Yeah, it could be.
So the purpose of the book that the Chinese professor and I are writing is to attempt to find the U.S. corporations who have executive teams who say, gosh, unless we find a way to be profitable immediately and long-term in China, unless we have a China strategy, we're not going to be profitable anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And to create examples of real productive collaboration, so that there are good examples of, I think the Chinese, like the Americans, they think we're naive, but they respect us. And I think they have certain historic problems with Japan and Russia. And if the hope is that one of the things will come out of the book and other things that other people are doing is that America and China will become very, very staunch allies.
That'd be interesting.
And
yeah.
if we don't become staunch allies, I think if China fails, America and the whole world will fail.
We're on to planet Earth.
And if it
Yeah.
doesn't fail, they're going to eat us alive. And the classic example is China's going to send a man to the moon when America can't afford to. And I think they've chosen that because that was how America demonstrated superiority.
Sputnik. You think over Sputnik, we had that race we went on like that. What about that? If you could share with me, you had containment, we had George Kennan, we had geostrategic thinking, and we had a Marxist dialectic that came to inform, I guess, almost like in a religious sense, the organization of that society. You have a communist government. Are they still preaching dialectical materialism, Marxism, as they become so adroit as functioning capitalists? And what is their relationship along those ideological lines? Their political power is still held by a notion of Marxism, or what is the reality there?
There has been an absolutely fundamental change. The revolution is being reversed. In my view, China is and always has been a feudal society. My view is that Mao was simply, the foreign powers were about to chop China up into pieces.
They had opium wars and things that were delivered down on them, yeah.
Mao came along and he preserved the sovereignty of China. He used a communism as a rationale to get the country to fight together.
Yeah.
But Deng Xiaoping,
Yeah.
in '82, began dismantling the whole revolution, and in 1998 they made profound decisions. In 1990, 90+% of the Chinese economy was state-owned.
In what year now?
1990.
Okay. 1990?
1990.
In 1990, 90%?
Yep.
1990 and 90.
There were 300,000 state-owned enterprises.
Right.
They proposed to privatize by 2008 all but 291.
Wow, big transformation.
And essentially, they're not just going to take the money now from the foreigners. They're going to allow the foreigners to take positions in the Chinese companies, to get the management. If I'm a Chinese manager, I'm 40 years old, everything I've ever managed was in a non-profit-seeking context of a state-owned enterprise, where the whole country was a single company.
Right.
And the political leadership would allocate resources in order to make the whole country work. Now, in the courage and genius of the Chinese leadership, Harold, is absolutely very impressive to me, because they are totally re-engineering their society with no safety net in less than 5 or 10 years.
Now, help me out in a pattern way. Soviet Union imploded in 1989, and we've got a pretty much of a mess. I mean, we had Mr. Sachs and Chubais, we had shock therapy. But my daughter married a fellow from St. Petersburg, and a lot of people that are not doing well in the Soviet Union, maybe it's going to exert itself. You got a oligarchy, you got kleptocracy and that sort of thing. Is it a danger in China? Are they that they could go the way of the Soviet Union? Or how does China stack up as an example of a previous Marxist-based economy with Russia? And if you think of it in a historical context, maybe you see Russia differently than I do, but I'm just wondering if you could address that as an international business venture capital guy.
China has incredibly smart, good, effective, courageous leaders. And I think Gorbachev was protected by Brezhnev and others and brought, I think people like Brezhnev knew that Russia was not going to work, the Soviet Union was going to work. They didn't want the change to occur during their watch, but a person like Gorbachev could not, in my opinion, have risen to that position without being protected by 2 or 3 previous leaders.
Yeah.
And I think Brezhnev became leader because he was a logistical genius and could get things to where they needed to when they needed. The Chinese have, I'm not sure why, but their leadership, in some ways Mao's behavior and George Washington's behavior is very, very similar.
Really?
There's a classic story about, I think, 1777 in Trenton, New Jersey, where
fought the Hessians?
where Washington, on a big white charger, rode out 100 yards from the Redcoats, 50 yards from the Redcoats, and they opened up at 100 yards, and they opened up at 50 yards, and the whole front row, 2 or 3 front rows of American soldiers were turned into hamburger. But not a single round hit Washington or the horse.
Really? The horse?
Not a single round.
You need the horse for the painting.
I got the painting.
Yeah.
And Washington turned to these American farmers and said, "It's a fox hunt, boys, get 'em." And Mao did the same thing. He would walk up and down while snipers shot at him.
Really? I'll be darned. Yeah.
Because you have to have a leadership that is not frightened by failure.
That's interesting.
Because
In general, do you think it's a generalized principle?
If you have a leader who is,
Business, government, whatever?
I think it's a generalized principle. If the prospect of failure is something, a guy like
unthinkable, like Louis XVI.
Washington was the richest man in America. The founding fathers of the United States took on the most powerful military machine in the world with almost no chance of winning.
Yeah, that's right. And you had a feudal
and
system
won.
for 700 years, an Argent regime in every one of the feudal states in Europe, and they won because they were moving with the zeitgeist, perhaps, or with the altering all reality, the industrial thing coming.
Well, history may be a nightmare, but at least in the last 5,000 years, it's moving in a positive direction.
Let's
for us,
hope. Yeah, it is. But that's another thing we can address because you're concerned with it. I've written your paper. I mean, read your paper, and you have the same concern I do. I have had throughout my adult life is as you referred to him. I love the term. I've used it in a poem. Species lethal weapon. And you've written a paper on that, and maybe we could address that. We now have the capability, apparently, to destroy the whole species with the weapons that we so cleverly have developed as we fought one another up this Mount Sisyphus called life. And that's a thing that, let's hope it's not Mount Sisyphus, or where is it going? But that's something that concerns you as well in a large philosophical thing. And you proposed a Manhattan 2 project and so forth. Maybe you want to talk about that?
That's another book. My understanding is from Jared Diamond's Guns, Steel, and Germs that there have been 60,000 generations of people that were anatomically the same as us today. We happen to be living at the time in which we've split the atom and we now can split the gene. We can alter genes.
Amazing, yeah.
In my view, that means that any single individual among 6 billion of us can commit species suicide.
Okay. Can you spell that out? This little, how can Joe
In other words, we never had the ability. Our weapons could not obliterate the entire species.
But how can one individual do that if they can get their hands on that? But most people can't get their hands on those weapons.
If the big,
maybe we could spell it out.
If high school students can build nuclear bombs using information available on the internet.
Yeah, you just look it up on the internet. You get a recipe from grandma.
If one of them sets one of those things off,
I see, yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it's available to people.
It's
That's
available.
what you're saying. Yeah, right. Okay, I see. Yeah, right.
So
right.
the main point is, we never had the technical ability to create weapons that destroy us all.
Yeah, that's right.
So any single individual who has access to that stuff, by definition, is capable of destroying us all. So in order...
And people increasing greater numbers, we'll get to where all 6 million, in the name of freedom, everybody's got to have access to it.
In order for us to survive,
it's
I
the
think,
zeitgeist. Yeah.
we've got to create some sort of mechanism that prevents any of us from wanting to destroy us all. And that's, I think, a fascinating challenge. And I think the only things we have to work with, we all obey the laws of physics. My other contention, which is a little more contentious, is that human beings respond to moral authority.
Okay, that's interesting. You talk about Gandhi, you talk about Mandela and other things, and Jesus, and our great spiritual leaders. Yeah, you address... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Gandhi basically is an interesting example of a little 90-pound lawyer who, in the midst of a civil war involving 300 million people, which were 1/6 of the human race, with the 1949 partitioning of India and Pakistan.
That's right. It was horrible.
They were killing 1 million people a day.
Staggering. Staggering.
This little guy said he wasn't going to eat until all the violence in that civil war stopped. And my understanding is 6 weeks later it had all stopped.
Yeah, he did that. He had a moral authority, you say. The salt, the march to the sea with the salt, that sort of thing. He had that, and he had that whole philosophy. Martin King, in a certain way, had that here. He had that notion that other people have done things. That was a strategy on Gandhi's part because he didn't have any choice. There was no way he could address the military reality that the British posed. So he inspired the nation to do it in the name of nonviolence, and a moral authority behind that.
Mandela did the same thing, South Africa, and was going to blow up.
And they were called terrorists by the people who were supposedly, as Hitler was called a terrorist, or Tito was called a terrorist by Adolf Hitler in the Balkans when he fought against the occupation of Yugoslavia.
Jesus was executed as a criminal.
You're right.
We measured time.
Socrates had to drink the poison. Yeah.
We measured
history do be a nightmare from which we ought to awaken, I think.
Well,
maybe.
I don't think so.
Okay, good enough.
I think you have to enjoy your joys and sorrows equally. And if you can't do that, you're not going to be successful or happy.
But I don't want to live in an age where they don't have anesthetic things. You know, that sort of thing. That is. But this is a new kind of thing in the universe. We've only had that. Couldn't do it in the Second World War. You know, you think about it. Within our lifetime, we've crossed some sort of an existential line that should wake us up to something. You know, I mean,
the problem. Richard Feynman, one of his first jobs was helping to develop the atomic bomb. After the war ended, he didn't do any work for a year because he thought there was no point.
Thought it was going to go.
We were going to go.
Yeah.
But my view, Harold, is that when we all realize, and September 11th is an excellent example, when we all realize we have a problem, I mean, after September 11th, America asked, why do these people not like us? American ways of doing things threaten these societies' ability to continue to be what they are. And I don't think they intended to sober and humiliate us, but not destroy us, because they didn't go after targets that were the most sensitive targets they could go after, like disease control centers or things like that. So I think that problems invite a collective positive response. Makes the lions and the lambs fight together to save the common cause.
Yeah, well, that's a cause that we all have an interest in. We just had a big demonstration here Sunday of people. They're having the Atomic Test Ban Treaty, but there should be maybe a special interest in terms of establishing a context of like a Manhattan 2 project or something to deal with this question rather than putting our head in the sand and pretending it'll go away.
Well, what I'm proposing in that book called The Age of Species Lethal Weapons versus the Philosophy, Genetics, and Physics of Moral Authority, is that there be a Manhattan II project in which the very best minds in the world are brought together. And I'm suggesting basically that they create collaboration bombs. Bombs, like if we can create a neutron bomb that doesn't kill people, it kills people but leaves the building standing. Maybe we can create something that leaves the building and the people standing but makes them more tolerant and have better problem-solving skills. Maybe we can put something in the water that will make us a little less aggressive. But on the other hand, the more profound thing is, what if I'm correct that Gandhi and Mandela had moral authority, that even their enemies respected them? You and I are just physics. We're just physics.
Everything's physics. Everything's resonancy. There's nothing else in the universe but resonancy, according to string theory.
So it seems to follow to me that there's something unique about the physics of people with moral authority.
Interesting thought.
And that although we may, with our finite minds and finite lives, have an almost zero chance of solving the crisis of extinction that I think exists,
we could look to the people with moral authority.
We could look to the physics of how they work, but also our genes have countless times met extinction crises. And for lack of a better term, wisdom there are very few doctors in the United States with doctorates in physics. And yet, when you think of medical doctors
don't understand physics.
Some of the best of them are realizing that medicine is physics. And when Richard Feynman, the leading physicist of the last generation, was dying of cancer, he was able to work out why sticking electrified needles into the tumor, in fact, caused it to get smaller. And his explanation was pretty simple. The heat sped up the circulatory process and brought more of the body's natural anti-cancer fighting mechanisms to the site of the problem.
Helped the body do what it's capable of doing.
But his doctors didn't know why it worked. They just knew it worked. So I guess what I'm saying is we have to, I think, look at what is the genetics and physics basis of the traits that human beings have that make them responsible, tolerant of others, and collaborative?
How about
as an empirical study?
As an empirical study, I've got this notion, I've floated it with you and so forth, that we can destroy about 1970 is the date we best can come up with when we cross that existential line. One I have is that we've come up to 200,000 years of human evolution. From first we appeared from Homo habilis and Australopithecines and the whole hominoid line, and we get to a point where the weapons are such that we can wipe out the whole species. I told you off camera that Michio Kaku, a friend of mine who's was the co-founder of string theory, I think it's fair to say, with Brian Greene, has said that we have not only the ability to wipe out the species, which is very, very traumatic, and he thinks that he studied with Edward Teller that we can wipe out life on this planet, which is an even more precious lesson in the evolution of any universal consciousness that might exist in an a priori state in the universe and so forth. So we live at that time. There's some countervailing, transformative, existentially relevant transformation, and the one I have is that we've gotten to the point where we are so clever with our technological, we were able to transcend scarcity as a reality in which our institutions are to be formulated out of a condition where all of our institutions were formulated, say, before 1970, within a condition where there was scarcity as an ontologic reality. So we have a changed economic system that could be liberating in that material sense, and the material and even in the knowledge sense, that there's something existentially going on qualitatively different than what has been the case out of history, and something like that might be relevant to an understanding that would make possible some kind of transformation that's leading to something beyond even what we've been throughout the human experience. We may be coming to the end of the human experience, a new relationship collectively to the whole evolution of universal consciousness, like the pregnancy, leaving the womb, birthing to a new relationship than that which we have been throughout all this time. We may be privileged to be at that time. I don't know, does that that seems to me to make some sense, other than just trying to carry forth with the institutional assumptions that are all predicated upon thought patterns and institutions which are outdated by the larger ontologic reality.
I agree. I feel.
So how do we get that out is something that might be a reality that is very inconvenient to all of our institutions. It was a little inconvenient for the feudal lords at Versailles to deal with the realities, and they cut off King Louis. It was an ancient regime. It was out of date by the zeitgeist. The artists pick up on that, but then I wonder if the situation, how this is operating, is there's something new needed. Economics, everything needed, other than the assumptions out of which we come from history, that's all.
I think, wouldn't you agree, Harold, that when something happens that enables everybody, take September 11th, to realize simultaneously that the world is radically different from what it was yesterday. That is what I'm saying is the problem, because it's so self-evident, engenders a collaborative, positive response.
I'm not sure that it has. Do you? Do you think it has? Einstein said the item changed everything except the way we think. I see a lot of evidence for people holding on to outdated patterns of thinking in economic theory and in political theory and in war making and in, we got forces in 130 countries. We're going to superimpose a certain system on the world that we think is market fundamentalist, right for the world, and that that's creating a lot of political friction in the world. And I don't hear anybody in the political authority talking about an ontological change that talks about anything like, hey, we've transcended scarcity, we have measurement of that. Take world game and the places where they've come up with it. There's enough. There's enough. We've got enough for everybody within a reasonable context. And so I don't hear anybody saying that. It's all battling for scarce resources and who's got the inside track on making the best deal. And that sort of, it's the same kind of way people have been thinking throughout all of history that could be leading us to the brink of political chaos that's going to let somebody do something like set off the destructive scenario. Or where is the leadership, the moral leadership that is there now? I mean, our political leadership in the world and our UN and that kind of thing. I just don't know where we look for that or find it. I don't see.
Well,
who's our Gandhi? Where is he? George Bush?
I think that, although I think the probability of the human species becoming extinct before the end of my natural lifetime, let's say within the next 50 years, is pretty close to 100%.
You think that? You walk around feeling that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the other hand,
you have children?
No children. No. On the other hand, I have a very strong confidence that we're not going to become extinct.
Okay, that's a seeming contradiction in terms. That's not allowed within the current way of
Everything
thinking.
is true and false at the same time.
You would insist on such a thing.
Well, if the theory of relativity and the theory of quantum mechanics are inconsistent, but each explain their neighborhood, it's a good example of everything being true and false at the same time.
Superstring thinks they're going to be able to subsume it all in some sort of a thing, and we live in parallel universe. It's amazing time to be a live participant. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Yeah.
Well, I go back.
What a time to be alive.
In other words, how is it that America produced a Lincoln at exactly the moment required?
Oh, our leader's yet to come. Is that it?
How is it that Gandhi appeared at exactly the time? How is it that Mandela appeared? In other words, there is something in the diversity of us as a species, and I call it the geniuses in moral authority, that simply is there when we require it. And a man, Mandela didn't, Gandhi and Mandela didn't set out to be Gandhi and Mandela. They got up every morning, put their trousers on, and went out and dealt with problems. But the way they dealt with the problems was so impressive that you and I are sitting here talking about them.
Yeah, that's right.
And
yeah.
so,
Not to mention Jesus, Muhammad, and Buddha. Yeah.
exactly. My theory is that the problem will generate. The challenge we have in one sentence is that our
Supply will create its own demand, or demand will
well, I
create
don't
its
want
own
to put
supply.
it in those, I don't want to put it in those terms.
Oracles of the world line up.
The question is whether or not our intelligence, we can't manage our intellectual ability and we become extinct. The other way to put it, if our moral intelligence doesn't take the same exponential leap that our technical intelligence is taking, then we'll simply be like putting a Porsche engine in a tricycle.
I think if it doesn't make the leap, we're not going to make it.
But I do.
That's what we got to make the leap. It's time to leave the womb. That's what I'm trying to say. Let's get out of here. Let's, you know. And so, okay, yeah.
So well, I'm almost certain that it's probable that we'll become extinct. I believe that we will not become extinct
because of some intervening.
The problem of
we can't see some synergistic something we can't see.
Well, the problem of extinction may seem novel to you and I, but it's constant in our evolution.
99% of the species have gone extinct in this system of organization. They're all gone extinct, but I still don't like the prospect.
The problem is that we're the wisdom that they all generated.
Heaven help heaven. You know, well, it may be a challenging time. We may be able to pull something out, and if it is the work you're doing and so forth, and if you're gonna get the word, it's gonna be transmitted around the world within the internet and within the public access television. You may have had a good part of that from our guest now. That's John Milligan-Whyte. My pleasure talking. Thanks for coming. Let it be the beginning of a communication we have, trying to address these big questions. I thank you for all your work. I really do. You're working on really good projects in a good moral context. You're one of those moral leaders, I would say, that we might begin to repair to.
Well, Harold, you're one of the people that, like Johnny Appleseed, goes about spreading
seeds. Anyway, it's been your pleasure to have his perception. We invite you to tune in. We'll come back again tomorrow. That's it for now. Once again, John, thanks a lot for coming. Great pleasure talking with you. And in the audience, we invite you to tune in. We'll come back again tomorrow. Until tomorrow.
Excellent.
So we just hit that's such a big thing. I don't know. But you write on that so well. You really do. When did you put that piece together about the species lethal weapons system?
2 weeks in July of 2002.
Anything in particular prompted you to do that? Have you been musing on this over a long period of your life, or I have?
All my life.
You have too.
In the relationship of the weak and the strong.
It seems to, and the relationship of the weak and the strong. Trying to, that it seems to me we got similar things we're interested in, that sort of thing. But that's an issue that's always informed what I'm. Everything else is subsumed by that in a way. Everything else looks kind of small compared to that, you know. But it sure is an interesting time. Isn't it the Chinese that said to spare us from living in interesting times?
Yes.
And that one's all blown to hell.
They also said we can't be friends until we've fought. So I really like that.
Oh dear me! There's a thing coming up.